I want to thank you, Danah Boyd, for agreeing to be interviewed by NYSAIS-Now. We just came from hearing a very provocative talk to our assistant directors and division leaders at our conference here in Mohonk. And, there are many questions that were asked, and so I'm going to ask a few during this interview. So I want to begin by asking you to talk a little bit about where you began, about the way in which the media, internet, the social media was viewed by young people initially when they first understood the potential of their potential power to create certain realities.
So maybe I'll take you back to, even in the 1990s. One of the things that was fascinating in the 1990s as young people were coming online, right? This is the day of everybody getting AOL discs, and it, starts happening en masse, is they start seeing whether or not they can mess with the system, right? And, my cohort thought we would hack into the security infrastructure just because we could, right? But, it was about leaving an Easter egg until, of course, the feds showed up. And, fast forward, and you're in an era of MySpace. And what do people learn? If you just inject code into a MySpace profile, you can make it do glitter and glam and all sorts of other fun things. Isn't that great? And so you fast forward to this and you end up with this environment where they start to try to manipulate media. How can they use not just the technology to manipulate internally, but what are the things they can shape externally? And the reason why media was so important was that it was at a time when everybody was talking about, social media marketing and creating your brand and owning all of this. And the media had tremendous power. And so folks who felt as though they didn't have power looked at that and said, oh, come on, game on. Let's figure out how we can have power in this environment as well. And so it becomes a toy. And for many people at the beginning, it was just to show that they could. There was no ideology. There was no real intention. It was just, can I get some media spectacle to happen so that I can laugh with me and my friends?
Yeah. So now I'm fast forwarding, just the interest of time. And we are now really currently in an era in which questions about what is real news and fake news, responses to current events take on a life of its own in this sort of huge fantasy world that is a part of the internet scene. And I'd like you talked a little bit about this, and I'd like you to sort of express how these current tools are being used to manipulate political understandings.
Right. Nothing is more powerful than fear. And the result is that if you want to mess with any political ecosystem, all you have to do is drive fear. And how do you drive fear at scale? You get to media and you try to get them to say things that make it so unclear what is reality. This is referred to as gaslighting. We can't tell which way is up or which way is down. And so when you've already learned the skills to manipulate the media, getting them to sow discord, to question reality, to make fools of themselves, isn't that hard, especially when they're under pressure to respond fast and furious. Most of what I see in terms of social media is used as a vector to mainstream media. Now that doesn't mean that they're not also trying to spread memes or spread content themselves, but most of that is in order to dog whistle, to find other people that are like them, to radicalize other people, to engage people in the game. Now, of course, once you've built this infrastructure, and I'm still referring to a lot of the young people and the folks who come in, others see that it's effectively an army that they can use for their own political means. And I think that's where we've seen a lot more pain in the last, certainly 12 months, but arguably I would say 21. And that's where, whether you are holding on to white supremacist and white nationalist views and you've been looking for an army, or whether you're a foreign state who isn't pleased with the American establishment, leveraging these networks and getting them to mobilize is powerful. And that's where I think there's a real challenging part of these networks. They're willing to share tactic, even if they don't share a goal. And that's pretty significant, because that means they're willing to try anything, even if they don't agree with the goals of somebody who may be trying to play them.
So do you think when you first talked about the way young people used this powerful tool, they did it as a kind of whimsical exercise, at least that's how I understood it. And now during your talk, you used the word of weaponize. So has the trajectory been from a kind of huge prank, an intellectual prank, to now something more sinister? Do you view it that way?
Keep in mind that a lot of people still see Trump as a large prank. So there's a lot of people who still aren't taking any aspect of this seriously. And especially amongst a lot of young people. Right? What part of the political economy have they had a say in? Where have they been able to have a part? What do they know about how our agencies operate and how our infrastructure works? We've kept them out of public life systematically for years. So they have no visibility into this, and they feel as though they have no power. So I think that's where it's also acknowledged that, like, yes, there are people who understand how to manipulate power, but there's a lot of people involved who don't even understand what power is.
So I'm going to, again, move forward in a direction that I think is very relevant to the group that you just spoke to. What you presented has profound ramifications in the current life of our students, of all of us actually. How would you see the role of educators in terms of awareness, a self-awareness, help to promote self-awareness among young people who are the ones who exercise this power as you've described it?
I certainly think that educators are the most important front line. I think one of the challenges with the field as a whole, including my own responsibilities in it, is that, especially in progressive communities, we've taken on like certain frames, critical thinking, social emotional learning, and we've adopted those without really interrogating how they're received, without seeing how they're experienced or understood. And in some ways, we can actually do damage that way. Our students are not always the most stabilized individuals. We've felt that pain, we've seen it, whether we're talking about bullying or whether we're talking about, mental health issues, we've felt it, but we don't think about how it can be used to do harm to others. So I think that, as we look at the political shifts in the political landscape and we look at this weaponization issue, I think it behooves us to step back and go, okay, what responsibility do we have in helping young people as they sort out their identities in light of these new potentials? How do we take into account what's going on here as we really think through our responsibility and our efficacy with regard to, teaching empathy, or with regard to, asking people to be critical thinkers of history? And so it's not that I think that we are inherently doing things that are bad. I think that we need to actually constantly evaluate and assess. And I think that this moment of destabilization within the political ecosystem should also be a moment where we wake up and try to actually do something. And I actually believe educators are in a phenomenal place to make a difference on the front lines.
Do you think that educators are as aware as they need to be of the power of these tools?
No.
And how would you begin to, your talk obviously reaches out to a certain group, but do you have any thoughts about how to make these important people in terms of what you've just said and the influence on young people more aware?
I have a lot of empathy also for teachers and what pressures they're under, right? They're under, they almost have a client relationship with parents at this point. The amount of pressure that they're under, they don't get to look up. So the question is also for me, how do we relieve educators of some of the pressure they're facing so that they can look up? I'm a big believer that, most educators on the ground, they really want to help their students. But when they're maxed out themselves, I don't know that they can be as effective as they could be. So I'm more interested in how do we push to give them the space to learn so that they can teach, and I'm confident that they would do so.
Okay, I'm going to shift to another but related question. So educators are one group of people who obviously are formative in the life of students, but so are parents. And you're a parent, I know that. So how do you see the role of parents in terms of making students aware, making young people rather aware of their own powers and the powers of others to shape their thinking and their worldview?
Right. And, I would say this is one of the reasons why, I wrote the book that I did, which is like, I want parents and everyone to chill out, relax, take a moment to appreciate where your kids are at and really focus on them. And to be honest with you, most parents and their kids are going to be okay. So a lot of it is, where do we look at things where things go terribly awry? And that's the distinction to me here. What's challenging to me is that most of the folks who are really struggling are struggling at home. And so that's where parents aren't the front line, because there are already major issues there. Whether they're, just look at the kids whose parents are struggling in the opioid crisis, right? They're one of my huge challenges. I can't ask parents to please stop using drugs and pay attention to your kids. We've been there, right? Like, that's not where it's at. So it's, how do we also support parents who are struggling? And this is where I would say, for parents who are fortunate enough to be doing well, fortunate enough to be in a healthy and stable household, reach out to your community. And I think that's where we owe it to ourselves to not just focus on our children, but to focus on the children around us. And if we want to think of it selfishly, fine. It helps our kids when we are paying attention to the kids in the community. And I think we have to get back to that community-centered piece rather than putting all of the pain and burden on parents. And that's what I'm hoping we will start doing. Certainly what I tried to do with my previous work, certainly what I'm trying to push forward more generally. And my hope, your schools are really focused on, like, how do you create community? How do we scale that beyond your schools? And so my question for your schools, what is your responsibility to the community outside of your school? How do you take that seriously? Because your community is so privileged to really have that sound, solid, strengthened community. So how do you leverage that privilege to go beyond?
Great question. And let's end it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.